Hi, I'm Dan, the agency man. Over the past few years, I've been fortunate enough to speak to over 3,000 agencies about how the best grow so quickly, stay relevant, and dominate their niche. And the one thing I found they all have in common is the confidence to say no. In this podcast, I'll bring you some of those conversations to inspire you to take the leap towards going niche, help you overcome any obstacles, and give you the confidence to just say no. Today I'm joined by Harry Metcalfe and Dave Mann, who run DXW, a specialist agency that only works with the government. DXW sets out to help the public sector spend less on technology so that it can spend more on education, healthcare, policing, and welfare. They have grown organically and deeply care about people and improving their lives in the UK. I was really curious to understand how DXW attracts and keeps some of the top technologists in government, such as the former government head of research, John Waterworth, and Coca Rivas, who has held multiple leading transformation roles in the government. We discussed their processes for hiring and team structures in the context of being a niche agency, how they keep their team skills and knowledge up to date, the spin-off products they developed as a result of the research and development, and what would have happened if they wouldn't have said no to some of the lucrative opportunities. DXW have built an agency with real purpose, and with a team of 68 highly intelligent people, Harry the founder is a true reflection of the deep care and curiosity for using technology to make an impact. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Yeah. So did you, before this, was your background in public sector or like?
No. No, so I've always been sort of computery, since school. I took a couple of years out after school to think about what to do with life, and in the end discovered that life was a bit difficult, so I thought I'd go to uni and do that instead, which was a sound decision.
A safe option.
Did computer science there for my undergrad degree, then I moved up the road to the other uni in Brighton, Sussex Uni in Brighton. And started a PhD there, which I didn't finish in the end. I got to the end of my sort of funded period of study, which was 3 years of research rather, and sort of discovered.
Did you deliberately kind of push it that far? Or
no,
was it
actually, no. I don't think I was very well suited to doing a PhD, and. In hindsight, it probably would have been better for all concerned if I'd pulled the plug a little bit earlier, but I think I wasn't sort of switched on enough to realise that at the time. And so when the end of the money and the end of the time came, and that kind of forced me into really sort of seriously sitting down and thinking about, do I want to do 2 more years of this research while also having a job? And I discovered that the answer was resoundingly that I didn't. I wasn't motivated enough by the research anymore to be willing to do that. And sort of coincidentally, at about the same time, the opportunity to start DXW kind of appeared. And so that kind of made the decision for me in the end.
What was the topic?
Well, that's the post-compilation optimization. So you take how much shall I explain this?
Go for it. Go for it.
Very nerdy.
I love it.
So you write a computer program in source code, in a programming language, and this is a little bit more complicated now, but 20, 30 years ago, you would write it in a programming language which you would then compile into bytecode, which is machine-readable code, which is the actual instructions that are understood and get executed by the processor in your computer.
Right.
A part of producing a compiler, pretty much since compilers have been a thing, is to run the code through a process of optimization, which is designed either to make the code run more quickly or to take up less space.
Or to the processor.
Yeah, so that you need less storage to hold your program, which used to be important. It's not so important now, but used to be very important when storage was much more expensive. Or to require less CPU time to get the same amount of work done, which is still super important.
Absolutely.
But out there in the wild, there are lots and lots and lots of very old programs written in very old programming languages for which there may not be any source code anymore, or perhaps there just aren't really any developers, or not so many, that understand how to work with that language anymore. Maybe the last update to the compiler was, in the late 80s or the early 90s. There's some really antiquated stuff knocking about. Like, as I understand, it might be apocryphal this, but as I understand it, pretty much all airline bookings still go through a set of systems somewhere hosted in the south of France.
I wouldn't be surprised.
That are the same as, like they're the original ones, right? And the airline bookings around the world are dependent on this thing. So changing it for something else is like it's global aviation, right? It'd be a huge big deal. So there's a strong incentive just not to screw with it. It works.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you get the airplane tickets and then you have like so much information on it that you just go, why is all this stuff on here? But I'm assuming it's all from the old systems, and probably trying to remove
Who knows?
from that is
in that setting, if you've got an old legacy system and you need it to have more capacity than it has, and you can't find any devs to make any changes to it, and you can't buy any new hardware because nobody makes that hardware anymore. It would be super nice if you could take those compiled programs without having the source code and run them through some kind of process that optimizes them again, even though we don't have source code anymore. So that was the topic of the research, was to try and prove that that's possible, to try and produce some kind of proof of concept thing that would take a compiled program and apply newer optimization techniques to it than were available at the time that it was originally compiled.
That makes sense. Is that still a problem for you now in work? Like,
it's no, it's not a problem I've come across in my professional career at all. It is a real problem.
So would you say that it was good that the research stopped there, or?
It's a problem. It was super interesting. It was very hard. And I think I didn't quite understand the shape of what I was getting myself into. I kind of really enjoyed the practical part of it, but didn't really enjoy the reading or the writing. And I think that's kind of back to front for somebody who's going to be in research. Anyway, so I was
important.
It is
just a bit,
And I think just personally,
just the writing part, like
Well, and also I've always been very motivated by finding a problem that's in front of me and trying my best to solve it in a good and compelling way, which definitely has translated through into the rest of work. But that's not really actually what a PhD is about. That might be a part of it if you're lucky, but the best way I've had this described to me is, imagine that you draw an enormous circle in your garden or something, right? And the diameter of this circle is, maybe 5 or 6 meters. A huge circle, right? And imagine that circle represents the sum of all human knowledge, right? And then you take one little bit of the circle, maybe about 1 millimeter long, and you make sure that as a person, you thoroughly and deeply understand absolutely every single thing that fits within that 1 millimeter of the circle. And then you write something else that adds 1/10 of a millimeter into the circle at that point. And so the circle of human knowledge expands. But if you're not actually interested, particularly in really deeply understanding that absolutely tiny fragment of human knowledge and knowing every single piece of work that's ever happened in that space, then doing a PhD isn't really the thing you should be doing. And in hindsight,
it's not valuable as well to the overall knowledge, is it? Because you're kind of almost just stopping at that level that everyone else had anyways, because you need to almost go beyond.
I don't know about that, actually. The process is quite good. Like, I think if you went and you wrote a thesis for your PhD that didn't actually say anything new, you wouldn't get through your Viva, because this is all peer-reviewed stuff. So, but that also it raises the bar, right? It means that you've got to be pretty confident that you are going to be able to do something new and original. Otherwise, otherwise you're not going to get through it.
Well, you probably won't get funded to start with unless you've got
fair point.
So I think I didn't really understand that dimension of it when I started. Anyway, this is a long aside.
No, I love it. So it's so what's your background then? Is it David?
Dave,
what do you prefer?
Dave's fine.
Dave's fine.
I started work about 100 years ago, it seems. I started as a journalist, and
So you had the writing part. You should have got together much earlier.
Well, yeah. I started working at a magazine that built a website in the mid-90s. So I was involved in the very early kind of digital explosion in London. And then I worked for a well-known ISP after that still exists. I'm not going to say who they are.
Yeah.
And then...
you obviously don't use them.
No, I don't. No. Well, they're now part of TalkTalk.
Yeah.
They're one of the original dial-up ISPs. Yeah. So I got a job. I went to California for a bit in around 2001 and discovered public sector computing and digital then, working for a startup that built software for what's called First Five, which is what, Sure Start centres here, early years childcare, and it's modelled on something from California called First Five.
Interesting.
So we built software that managed grant funding and measured the managed evaluation and sort of measurement of the outcomes they got from that funding. So they would give the money out per capita. So in Orange County, they'd give a certain amount of money. They'd have a certain number of kids that would come through the centres, and they would have to get outcomes for those kids.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of science that says if you get to kids in the first 5 years, they get better outcomes later in life. So even if they come from quite chaotic backgrounds, if you give them that early years support, then they will do better in the long run. So it made me realise that the world of software and web and digital could actually have social value. So I came back to the UK and was one of the people that worked for the office at eEnvoy that Tony Blair's government set up. So that was in 2001 too. So I've been working in public sector digital since then, in one form or another. I met Harry originally in about 2009 or 10 probably. There was a community around what we do.
Yeah.
So there are government bodies now, Government Digital Service, which I was part of the team that set up.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more structure around our industry now. But in around 2009-10, it was more of a community, and there were a lot of hack days and events, and Harry used to go as a developer, and I would go along as one of those government people that had data sets that people could play with. And then I was with the Government Digital Service from the beginning in 2011 until 2015 when we went for lunch, and I ended up being inveigled into DXW.
And the rest is history.
And the rest is history.
I love it. And you've got a little pin here as well. Look at that. Subtle branding. I really like that.
If I'd known we were on camera, I'd have worn one.
You wear it all the time, right?
Yeah, you got to wear it all the time. Yeah, it does remind me a little bit of the Star Trek kind of.
Well, I should take that as the compliment that it surely is.
Yeah, it is. Well. Yeah, it depends on if you like Star Trek or not, right? Like which camp do you follow.
Maybe part of my misspent youth.
Well, there you go. Yeah. What's like? I guess what would be quite interesting is so public sector is obviously the main area that you guys specialize in. What was the motivation then fundamentally? Like, what was it?
Well, I mean, it was
the deep change that you wanted to create in that space.
It all came about because of this website that I made while I was procrastinating on that PhD. So government at the time, this would have been sort of late 2007, would publish these consultation documents, which are part of the policy-making process. Essentially, they publish a bunch of questions and a bit of a backgrounder and ask and solicit people's comments. And this is part of how policy gets set, how legislation gets drafted. And I was involved in some campaign work at the time. And part of my sort of volunteering for that was to look out for consultations on topics that were relevant to us, and these were things like privacy, data protection, copyright reform, some digital civil liberties, which was part of the open rights group, which I'm still involved in. And at the time, each department or agency would publish these things on its own website. So if you were interested in farming or something, you could go to the Department for Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, and you could be reasonably confident that you would find what you were looking for there. But if you were looking, like I was, for something cross-cutting, I mean, any department could publish something that affects people's privacy. So I had to go and look at all of these websites every week, and that was rather annoying. So to scratch an itch, essentially, I built a little, not even a website, just a little thing, a little robot that would go to all of those sites and just tell me if there was anything new on them. And I talked to some people about this, and they go, oh, that's interesting. I'd quite like to be able to see that. So I sort of, put a bit of extra effort into it and made it into a website called Tell Them What You Think, which actually went to the individual websites, scraped the details of the consultations and published them in one central place where you could search them and get email alerts. So you could just say, I'm interested in the Data Protection Act, set that up as a sort of keyword search with an email alert attached, and you'd just get an email when anything published mentioned it. I didn't know it, but about 6 months before I put that up, consultations.gov.uk, which had been set up to solve the same problem, was shuttered. It worked by departments sort of publishing their consultations to it, which of course a lot of them just didn't get around to doing. So it was never kind of complete, which meant it didn't really generate an audience. It kind of turned into an empty pub, so it got closed. But then I published this thing about 6 months after that, and that
solution.
And it kind of generated some attention, because it was one of those sort of spotty bedroom hacker does thing type stories, which was quite popular at the time as well. So I probably sort of benefited from that. And I suddenly got invited to all sorts of things. I went and spoke. I went and did a plenary at Transformational Government 2008. That was a real.
It's a highlight.
Absolutely. I went and I actually got it remains a highlight of my career, that I managed to get myself booed by civil servants. I got up on the stage and suggested that Google was a bit better at search than DirectGov, so maybe DirectGov should use Google search instead of trying to do their own search, and I actually got booed.
I can imagine.
I was quite pleased with that. Anyway, so one sort of thing led to another, and I ended up with a contracting job at the Cabinet Office doing basically the same thing except for job vacancies in the civil service, which were also all published separately. And it was there that the penny really dropped. That there were most of the people who were around didn't really seem to understand technology in a meaningful way. As a citizen, I had the experience of having to consume government services that were not very good, and the experience of actually sort of jumping over the fence and sitting at a desk in Horse Guards kind of made me realise, oh, okay, now I understand some of why this is true. The other thing that was really exciting was that there was actually a small but growing group of people who really did know how to do a good job, and all of those people were just starting to talk to each other, and that's that community that Dave just mentioned. And I kind of got tapped on the shoulder by someone at the time who sort of said I could merrily contract my way around government till I got bored and do something else, or try and set my sights a little bit higher, try and build a supplier that caters to the need of those people who were kind of the upcoming generation of technologists in government and in the civil service, who at that time really didn't have anyone to go to. If they wanted a big IT project, they could go to one of the big, service integrators. If they wanted a big marketing project, they could go to one of the big advertising companies. That's fine. But if they wanted a kind of relatively small, user-led, design-led, agile, iterative, open source, contemporary bit of tech, there was nobody on the government frameworks that could do that.
Wow.
And so that was the kind of idea, was to try and build a company that could get on those frameworks and win business and do work that would meaningfully affect people's experience of government. And I'm happy to say, 12 years on, I think we're there.
Absolutely. What's the scale right now? Like what's the size of DXW?
68, I think.
Yeah,
plus or minus.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Amazing job, especially with a very specialized focus on technology. That's quite rare, especially for public sector in any part of the world. So amazing. What I'm quite interested in is, so you mentioned those frameworks. So does that, by you having had built that system in the first place and then working government side, was that sort of quite an automatic route into getting onto those frameworks, or did you still have to go through exactly the same tick box exercise that everyone else has to go through when they want to work with government?
The same, I'd say. And actually part of the journey for us has been agitating publicly and also working closely with government to try and make those frameworks better, because they definitely at the time when we started, they were impossible for an up and coming company to get on. So we had to rely on very small pieces of work that didn't have to go through framework agreements to be procured. When the G-Cloud framework came out, that was our first major kind of win, because that was a much better designed framework. When digital digital services framework came in to replace it, that was a very poorly designed framework.
Sort of a step back, wasn't it?
It really was, yeah. And we were quite vocal about that, and thankfully eventually the digital outcomes and specialisms framework replaced it, which worked much better. Did we have a hand in shaping how those? I think we probably did a bit, but not really in any formal way, just sort of by virtue of blogging about how we thought it should work and trying to talk to the people who were involved and give them our sort of feedback and suggestions.
It was useful. At the time I was on the other side of that particular fence, and there were quite a few of us inside who were frustrated by our inability to be able to procure the right supplier. So it was very difficult to make a good choice, something where you knew what you were after. And in the digital services framework, we were all on the other side trying to evaluate the suppliers that were applying to that, and the way that worked, we could tell that it was imperfect. So you would get certain suppliers who you knew couldn't do a thing, but you would, because they'd put the right words into a right box, they'd get the tick. So I think procurement's come a long way, partly because from the inside there has been a bit of a growth in digital capability in government.
I think that's right.
So since 2010-11, there have been a lot of people who've come into the civil service and also local government, the public sector more generally, who are more technically savvy, more digitally aware and capable. So that's filtering through now, and you're starting to see people coming into leadership roles who understand technology a bit better. So the world that I think, Harry, you were talking about, the 2008-9 pre-GDS era, I went into tons of meetings where, the first thing the person would say is, well, I don't understand anything about technology. And, it'd be a badge of honour.
Yeah.
And you kind of think, well, why are you in charge of £400 million worth of IT then?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a scary thought, isn't it? So in that process now that you're obviously a highly specialized agency, supplier to public sector. How are you being used by government to in a more formal structure influence these processes?
Well, it's a good question, really. I mean, I think by doing the work, and we do a lot of work on site with our clients. So, for example, we work with the Department for Education. We've got a team up in Manchester working on a service that allows teachers to claim back student loan payments. So they get sort of different bursaries for training for different subjects. And so it's a really interesting piece of work. By being on site where they don't have a digital team or they don't have many people who've got delivery experience, they can see the work happening, they can get involved in the team, and it helps build that capability. It builds more understanding of how agile, iterative product development happens. And that, I think, will benefit procurement, because it means that the buyers, if you like, there's this phrase in procurement, the intelligent buyer. I'm not sure about that. But, generally,
as opposed to?
As opposed to. But the more capability that government develops, and the way we work with them to build that capability, they can hopefully make better decisions about how they buy services and who they work with.
Yeah,
I think that ability to bring a kind of soft influence by just being around is really important. I mean, when we started, when it was just me, and then first member of staff who was a developer, and the second was a sysadmin. It was very technical grounding, and my background is technical, and I definitely approached the challenge with a quite naive sort of technology-centric view that you could fix government, quote unquote, and fix citizens' experience of government sort of merely by building them the right kind of website. That just changing the tooling would fundamentally change the culture and the experience. And I'm glad to say it didn't take very long for me to be completely disabused of that idea, because it's not actually really about the technology. Almost no technology that government does is particularly complicated. And I mean, this is not entirely a fashionable view, but it is what it is. The vast bulk of government transactions are applying for something, looking up a piece of information, telling them some information so that you can get some money. Those are the shapes of the challenges. Technologically speaking, they're mostly quite straightforward. The thing that makes government work challenging is the environment within which that work is delivered. It's the policy environment that you're in. It's the overlapping webs of stakeholders and the unclear lines of responsibility, the lack of clarity about who it is in a particular situation who has to make a particular decision about a thing and who gets to provide input onto that. Those things and the history and the legacy and the messy data, like those are the things that make a lot of government work quite challenging. And it's that has required us, in order to achieve our mission, to push at the boundaries of what we're able to do. So we started out very much as some developers who could build and host good WordPress sites and do that in a secure, government-friendly sort of way. But now we have an entire team dedicated to user research and product design. We have a strategy team that helps organizations to set the scene for delivery so that they're doing the right sorts of things. That hosting team has expanded far beyond just hosting WordPress stuff and is now able to host anything that we build for people, no matter what the tech stack is that we use. The delivery team, as in the builders of the sites and services, now isn't just developers, but it's senior developers and tech arcs, and we have system ops people in the teams, we have designers, we have front-enders, we have people with overlapping skill sets so that they can contribute to delivery management or product management or research, depending on the needs of the project, and we can move those people around. And this is absolutely key to making the thing work. And the broader that skill set has become, the better we've been able to kind of subtly influence policy from a delivery perspective. And that's what an awful lot of this stuff is about. It's about taking a policy almost always designed with very good intentions and by very well thinking people who absolutely understand their policy space, but are not necessarily technologists. And it's about taking that body of policy and trying to turn it into a working solution to a problem in a setting and with a relationship that allows you to take the lessons that you learn from delivery back to those policy people and say, we've been trying to put this into practice. Here are some of the things that we've learned that perhaps should influence how this work unfolds in the future. And that's when I said before that I feel like we've got there, quote unquote, in terms of being able to deliver, online public services in the way that I sort of originally aspired to. It's that dynamic that I mean. It's the ability to go back and for it to be a two-way relationship and not just, hey, here's a spec, go build a thing, which was the ubiquitous model in the early 2000s.
It's interesting. I'd love to come back in a moment to that and sort of talk about how you managed to build those relationships. But one of the things that you mentioned just now, which was quite specific, which I thought was like, okay, that's quite an interesting thing, is from a technological point of view, a lot of the work isn't that complex. Now, you're a developer, you know how exciting it is to work on complex work. How do you, especially as a specialist with such a niche focus? So one of the things that we often hear from specialists is recruitment can be quite hard because actually, you would expect there being loads of people out there, but actually it's reduced much more, isn't it? Because you need to get people in that have the domain knowledge. What's your experience with that particular?
The way of working that Harry just described is quite attractive. So a lot of developers, if you're a developer, you're in a very fortunate position because you know how to do computers. And that is a skill that is always going to be in demand. There's always going to be work available and you get to really choose. And some developers are motivated by the latest shiny new tech. And, there may be some kind of almost scientific interest that they have in pushing technical boundaries. But a lot of developers are problem solvers, and they want to solve problems that are real. And, for all the, startups, that maybe, I don't know, pick an example, a startup that wants to replace the convience store.
Is Facebook still a startup?
It's a bit bigger maybe. Yeah. But, there are these kind of ideas and these companies that sort of come and go. And, the sort of problem where you're fixing something for real people and having an impact on people's lives, that is a very attractive thing for a lot of software engineers. There are many jobs you can do, but not all of them are going to have the same kind of purpose.
I can give you an example from our work from that. Actually, for one of our clients is a housing association. We've got several housing association clients, and for one of them, we helped them. We've been helping them with their online reporting stuff for their tenants. And there was a tenant who had they had a drain in their garden with a broken cover. And in order to make it not something like their kids would fall into or something, it had like a piece of wood or a pallet chucked over it or something, just so it wasn't immediately a hazard. And they tried to report this, but never quite managed to get round to it. Never quite felt able to go through the telephone ping pong to get it reported and dealt with. And finally did get it reported and dealt with as a repair that they reported online, which they found very quick and easy, in part because the way we built the service meant that as soon as they made an online card payment for their rent, they were just automatically set up with access to this thing and didn't have to go through any more hoops. And that finally got fixed. And as a result of making that transaction easier, something that was having a measurable impact on the quality of life of this family got fixed and dealt with and sorted out. And that's a powerful motivation for a lot of developers. As Dave said, many developers are problem solvers at heart, and there are lots of different sorts of problems, and working on exciting tech is definitely an interesting and exciting thing, and so is working in organizations with huge scale and impact like Facebook. But actually sometimes fixing a real tangible horrible problem that's been plaguing someone for years because you built a better service that allows that person to get the job done in a simpler and quicker, more convenient way, a way that kind of fits into their life, that can be pretty rewarding.
Also for organisations, to use the housing example, there are jobs that computers do very well, like taking payments. And there are people working in call centres who could spend all their time just taking card payments, or they could spend their time solving real problems. So those complicated things that you really need to talk to someone, and someone needs to show some empathy, and those problems need people and time. So if you free those people to concentrate on that, that again is quite rewarding. We're helping the sorts of institutions, public institutions, that are under huge amounts of pressure, both sort of financially and existentially at the moment. I mean, we have a kind of political environment where institutions are under attack. People don't trust public institutions in the way that they used to. And poor service delivery is at the heart of that. If you can build better services, you can help people regain that trust in these institutions. And that's everything from housing associations to your local authority to a government department. And again, that is a problem that people find appealing and will want to work towards.
It's fascinating. So just listening to you guys, like, it's really clear that you have a massive passion for this as well, and you care deeply about it. And like, I mean, me just sat here, I'm like, I want to work for you guys now. So that I have no question whatsoever when someone walks through your door and ask these questions to you, that you can convince them. What's interesting for me as well is to know how do you portray what you're telling me right now to the outside world? Like, do you have like proactive recruitment activities that you do where you talk about these things and have seen a good result on attracting really good people?
We recruit through networks and communities of practice. We have some people in our business who have big names, I suppose you could say. So the former head of research for the UK government is our head of research, John Waterworth. Our director of strategy, Coca Rivas, has been in public sector digital the same amount of time as me, so about 20 years. She held senior positions in the Ministry of Justice, at HMRC, and GDS, the Government Digital Service. We do quite a lot of recruitment events, so both as sponsors and we take part in things. In the past, we've done things like Silicon Milk Roundabout. We've been there. But we are doing fewer of those events now. We're able to recruit off, networks and reputation. So,
and also I think we've gotten a lot better at telling the story of what we're doing over the last year or 18 months. I'm not quite sure exactly.
Since I've been in charge.
Since you've been in charge, Dave. Yes. And I think that's had a big impact as well. I mean, as a small business with a lot of work, it's quite hard to juggle all the things. It's quite hard to make sure you're consistently selling, consistently delivering, marketing what you're doing, looking for people. It's making sure that you're in a sort of secure and stable financial position. There's a lot of things there, and there's only so many hours in the day.
And you're a sole owner, right?
I was for many years, yeah. One of the things that I sort of actually regret that we didn't get around to doing earlier in the life of the company is making sure that we have a kind of more structured and formal sort of sales and marketing function that can be responsible for making sure that we do regularly talk about what we're doing and what's going on and how things are going. But I think we do have that now, which is very.
Yeah, I think we're getting better at telling our story.
Yeah.
It's been a thing where I think, as Harry says, not enough hours in the day, and it's a bit like most website design companies hate their own website because they never have time to actually do it properly. I think the way we work, we like to blog about what we do. And I think that there was a time a few years back when government was also a lot more open in the way that they would talk about the work. And as they've sort of clammed up a little, I suppose we've probably, as a consequence of that, maybe we've not written as much about our government work particularly as we might have done. I think that, working in the open and open source is they're sort of fundamental to our business, and that puts the onus on us to get better at telling our story because, like I say, we're well networked and we're well known in our industry, but, that only goes so far. And there are other opportunities that we should be, taking advantage of by telling our story a bit better. And, we're a modest bunch.
But also we want to push out beyond central government, which we've been doing for a while. And we've had some, we have clients in housing, we have clients in local gov and in the NHS, which is great. But the bulk of our work, the bulk of our client base is in central government, which reflects our history. But I hope it doesn't reflect our future. And if we want to have a broader footprint across all of the public sector and all of the challenges that it faces and the ways in which it affects people's lives, not just the ones that central government deals with, then we have to be good at explaining to people what we do and how we can add value and how we can help them in ways that aren't dependent on our network. And I think that's started to come through in the last couple of years since Dave's been in charge, which is really good and really exciting for me, because that's not something I managed to do in my kind of tenure as MD. I didn't really. We did win some stuff outside central government, but never really enough to feel like it was substantial. And I think that's changed now, which is really exciting.
I sometimes wonder, what's the purpose of company culture in your mind? Does company culture actually exist? I know it sounds like a really philosophical question, but what's your thoughts around company culture?
Culture definitely exists. I mean, you can define it in many different ways. It's the way that people behave and the way that they interact with each other. And there are those little things in an office that sort of show you what's important to a business and what they value and the behaviours that they want to encourage. And I think with because of the kind of mission and purpose that we have, those values are clear. There are similarities with the public service ethos. But then at the same time, we are a business and we have to be profitable. And, if we are not a profitable business, then the mission, we won't achieve our mission. But I think, we have a culture in DXW where people are listened to. It's a very open culture. People have a degree of autonomy within the delivery teams. They have the freedom to solve the problem that's been put before them. Whilst we have processes and structure for certain things, we try not to have a sort of overweening bureaucracy. Many of us who've worked in overweening bureaucracies before have no desire to go back to that whatsoever. But I think this kind of guiding purpose, the idea that we can have an impact beyond just building a website or writing a bit of code or doing some research, that's what really attracts people to us, and that's the sort of thing that people share. I think we have a degree of there's optimism in the business, and it's interesting because for a lot of agencies, it's quite hard work in agency world, and quite often people will stay for a couple of years, learn a bunch of good stuff, and then move on. And for the most part, we get people staying a bit longer than that. We have some very long-serving members of the team.
So would you, I guess, how would you say the fact that you work in public sector and you have that one purpose, like how would you say that manifests itself in particular examples within the business? Like, have you seen your team do certain things that are very unique to, I guess, an agency that would, specialize in the public sector?
Well,
culturally,
I'd say we have a degree of empathy. So we've done work, for example, in housing where you're close to the users of that service. And we've made design decisions and technical decisions, implementation decisions, that are based around people, genuine user need, people's needs. And I think we, as a business, will always advocate for the user need before anything else. And, there is an argument quite often, particularly in procurement, you're asked, well, how do you balance the needs of the organization with the needs of the users of this service? And, I always answer that by saying that if you're meeting the needs of your users, you're achieving your organizational objectives and goals. And I'd say that manifests pretty clearly at DXW. We will challenge a brief. There are certain, there's a way of challenging a brief, of course, where you do it in a constructive and a positive way in line with our values. Yeah. And I think the user comes first. And so that is, again, taking it back to recruitment and problem solving, those are things that people find very attractive. You can get software built anywhere, but do you care if it works or not?
Do you know what? It's a really interesting point because it takes that sentence that so many agencies that I know that do UX and design and build and whatever and say we're user focused to really a next level, because actually, although it sounds quite generic saying, yeah, we're user focused, but actually you are really, because exactly what you described, you're changing people's lives significantly in a way that, I guess, in comparison to if you built a website for a shoe brand, famous shoe brand, like how much would you be changing someone's life if they had a new shoe, right? Like, and you could say that you're doing it for the user, and yes, you are, but fundamentally, like, I think that's quite an interesting one. It almost sounds really real. I really like that. In terms of, I guess what's really interesting is I'd be curious to know how you continuously get people to like develop further and like be in this learning, because you're in a space where, yes, okay, maybe I assume technology doesn't move as fast, and or the technological challenges itself don't move very fast, but they're quite the world is moving fast, and you're serving so many people at the end of your product. Like, you kind of have to be really almost even more on top of the latest things and stuff than someone that does produce things for shoes, because you're, you know, I guess I'm just trying to understand a little bit more, like how do you continuously get people to be motivated to develop themselves, and you know, do you have any programs in place for them to continuously learning more and more about public sector specifically and technology?
I mean, we do have, so we take some time out from client work to work on internal projects. And I think it's interesting, whilst technology in public sector might be straightforward, in inverted commas, people's expectations are not. And also political pressure is another factor where, you know, you may have to build something very quickly, which is an interesting technical challenge. You know, if you want it to be solid piece of maintainable software that you've got to look after for the next 5 years, but you've got a deadline that has to be, you know, a minister has stood up and said, we will have this thing by, you know, December the 5th, therefore we must. So yeah, I mean, you know, each project is slightly different. People are going to learn by doing the work. Every project will have a different sort of political setting, if you like, and I mean small p, big P. In local government, the accountability is very different from central government. In a housing association or in the NHS, these are all quite different beasts, actually. So every time you go into a new project, it may be a different stage, it may be a piece of research, maybe a piece of experimentation, it may be a piece of development. There are things to learn, so the team will, and the people in the teams will learn new things by doing the work. But then, as I said, we also have some time out from client work where if you want to do some technical experimentation and look at new frameworks or new shiny things, then there's time to do that. We build a lot of internal projects, so we are quite good at making our management information about the business visible, for example, build lots of dashboards and play around with APIs a lot and pull data from systems. And, you know, this is all stuff that is, you know, it's an opportunity to learn stuff. It's also an opportunity to get better so that, you know, our clients will benefit from this experimentation as well. And it's probably, given that this is public money that we are being paid, it's not fair or right for us to do all this experimentation on the public dime, as it were. So this time for us to experiment is...
Plus, again, you know, you're solving quite profound challenges for human beings. That if it kind of goes wrong, then that's pretty disastrous, isn't it? Do you have like simulations or scenarios for like different areas of government that you can put your team under to allow them to do mistakes and sort of learn that way, especially for more junior team members?
The way we work, I mean, there's a phrase, you know, operate a no blame culture, which some people do, and we certainly do. I think part of agile iterative development is that you must be learning. So at the end of each sprint, there's an opportunity to retrospect, look back on what you've achieved over the last week or two, and, you know, have an honest conversation about what didn't go so well as the things that do go well. And in that way, you can look at, I mean, this is classic agile thinking. You know, you can look back at what you've done and learn from it. I think that's an important part of our culture.
I think that's right. I think we also try and set ourselves up in such a way that nobody is put in a position where they have to make a decision by themselves that could have such significant consequences. You know, a big part of that agile culture, I think, as well, is that decisions are made by the team, and the team is responsible for its decisions. You know, if we had a less experienced person on the team and they did something that caused a problem, then that is not wholly that person's responsibility. You know, that is a foreseeable thing that the team should be able to catch, and that's why we have things like pair programming sessions and code review for pull requests and things like that, to try and catch those sorts of things before they have a chance to cause a problem.
I think, you know, with research as well, we have a team led by a very experienced head of research. There are all sorts of ethical questions that come into research, and it's quite you need a lot of guidance, and it's good to have those more experienced hands around.
Yeah.
I think, as Harry says, we would not want to put anyone in a position where they are exposed in that way.
What's an example of an ethical situation?
Oh, I suppose sort of sharing, when we do user research and we go and talk to people, and we want them to be honest and free to speak. An ethical consideration, what happens to that raw data that we're gathering, that insight. We are legally bound and duty bound to protect that information, and we would not share that in inappropriate ways. And it's everybody who does research with us will sign a release at the beginning, which is very clear what we're going to do with their data. And we have a responsibility to take care of that and do it the right way. So it could be that that data it's quite easy for that to be misused, and obviously, and often it's not like a malign thing where someone says, "Oh, I want to find out what such and such has said about this service," but it's more, there's those sort of wider ethical questions about how research is conducted. And people who are maybe not used to doing research in that setting, they might not know this stuff. So again, that's where experience would come in, where we would help both our team and our clients understand what those ethical considerations might be.
It's very interesting, and it sounds like because of your specialism, it's allowed you to really hone in on some of those processes. I would assume some even to a point where you probably have tick lists, right, of certain things that you need to do before you engage in certain projects. Or
quite a lot of stuff that's written down about how we work, and quite a lot of it is published, not all of it, but quite a bit is published publicly in our playbook.dxw.com that anyone can go and read.
Oh, brilliant.
It is certainly, like, my own personal perspective on this kind of stuff is that the primary way that we get better, both as individuals and as a team, is by doing interesting and challenging work that includes opportunities to self-reflect, to introspect and retrospect. And one of the reasons, for the first couple of years of DXW's life, we did do odds and ends of sort of private sector stuff with the right kind of shape, just because fledgling company, you got to pay the bills. Yeah. But one of the reasons that we decided to stop doing that and to be really strict about maintaining our public sector focus was in order to maximize the opportunities for those sorts of things. Because at any time we took on a piece of work that was outside that mission, there's an opportunity cost attached to that in that we are not using that experience to get better at the core part of what we do.
I think that makes perfect sense. I think that is fundamentally what got you to where you are today. One last thing I wanted to find out a little bit more about. So you've got this other setup, right? DXW Cyber, which is kind of like cybersecurity consultancy for public sector?
For anyone.
Okay.
So it's a sort of sister company to DXW, but it is a separate company. In fact, we're about to rebrand. So new name, new look, coming in the new year.
Okay, we'll look out for it. Yeah.
But yeah, that was very much motivated by my experience of trying to deliver in a secure way inside government, seeing the kind of ubiquitous use of risk assessments and checklist sort of approaches to trying to make things more secure, which I just don't think work. And I think you can sort of look to the news for evidence of that, in that more or less every organisation uses that approach to a greater or lesser degree, and there's 2 or 3 major breaches a week in the news. So I don't think that approach works, and we set up DXW Cyber. I and a co-founder this time, Glyn Wintle, set up DXW Cyber to try and approach that problem in a new way, to try and help organisations to ground their security thinking in technical practice.
Yeah.
To really think about their problems the same ways that attackers think about their problems. So we've kind of landed on a bit of language around that we're a security consultancy focused on attack, that we are not penetration testers, we're friendly attackers. So we'll come and do some attack. We'll come and try and breach your systems, but in a much more holistic, red teamy type way that involves a lot of long-term follow-up and support. So rather than just kind of slinging a fat report on the desk, we'll actually stick around for a good number of months afterwards and really help teams to reflect on what's in it and to fix those problems in a strategic way, so that they get the broadest value that they can.
That makes sense. Is that like what? How did that come about from within DXW?
Well, I mean, government is quite security conscious. I mean, the main way this manifested was in our hosting, actually. In our hosting of WordPress stuff, we have a product, GovPress, that we built to host WordPress for public sector bodies, and those sites get attacked like all the time. Some of those sites are quite high profile, and so they are of interest to people, and we've had to work quite hard to keep them safe. And it was sort of my observation that we were not necessarily being asked by our clients to do things that we felt would be particularly effective, and that when we reflected on our own practice, it was the things we had just decided to do for ourselves that made the biggest difference. And I think that is reflective of the fact that our process for coming up with what those things are is very grounded in our technical practice, in our observations of the kinds of attacks that happen and when and what their shape is and how we can detect and prevent them. Whereas the governance, assurance, compliance approach that government has is very, very high level, very broad, very focused on risk assessment, not always carried out with the benefit of all that much technical expertise. And that disconnect is quite damaging. You know, I think if you look across any organization dealing with technology in a non-trivial way, which is basically any organization now, you see things being done that aren't actually very effective, and certifications that might give people peace of mind, but that don't really actually make all that much difference to organizational security. And we'd like to try and I think we're going to be able to bring a different perspective to bear on that problem.
I love that. Is it a complete separate team, or
Yep.
is it sort of that must have been quite a conscious decision from the start?
Partly, yeah. I mean, it's quite different in character from the rest of DXW's work, so it kind of made sense for it to be a different team. And then just the sort of corporate mechanics of having a shareholder made it make more sense to have it as a separate entity rather than trying to work out some convoluted way to get a new shareholder in. So that kind of factored into it as well. Yeah. But yeah, it's quite different in character from the rest of DXW's work and culture, and also evolving in a slightly different direction culturally, which is very interesting for me to see. But that culture piece and that values piece is still right at the front, as much or more so in security, I would say, than in technical practice, because it's impossible to codify secure behavior. You know, if you sit down with a new employee on day dot and you say, okay, here are all the things you must do and not do in order for the organization to be secure, they'll be sat at that desk for the duration of their employment, because security doesn't work that way. It constantly changes. And what you need is people who bring the right principles to bear and have the right values at heart, so that you can be more confident that they're more likely to make a secure decision when they need to. And that is a little bit about policy and rules, but much more about culture and motivation. And so we find ourselves talking with our clients about that quite often.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Final points for any agencies that are currently doing work for anyone and everyone, doing anything, whether it's design, dev, search, content, and are quite small. So maybe let's say smaller than your setup, and are looking to focus in a particular niche, whether it's picking a skill or an industry. What sort of would be each one of your top tip for them?
Oh, that's a big question.
Yeah.
You go first.
I was going to say the same, actually. Well, I guess if it's not too trite, it has to be the thing that you really care the most about, because this is the thing that you're going to be living and breathing. You know, to run a successful business and to grow and to support your people, you have to really care about it. It can't just be a question of, say, money, or, you know, we could do a certain thing because it's highly lucrative. Great if it's a highly lucrative thing that you love to do. It has to be something genuine that you care about. And for us, you know, we have this kind of mission that unites us all. So you need to find your mission and unite around it.
Love it.
Yep, I think I agree with that. You've got to know that you want to do it.
You'll be found out pretty soon if you don't.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I like this idea that you should hold on very tight to your principles, but very loosely to your ideas. I think if you're going to have something that's purpose-driven or something that's very specialized, you need to be confident that you're going into it for the right reasons, and that you're going to be able to do it well, and that the principles that underlie what you're trying to achieve are right and are understood clearly by everyone who's involved. But that a given idea about how to put that into practice is much, much less important. And you can try something, right? And if it doesn't work, try something else and try to make that decision reasonably quickly. But if you discover that your principles aren't working, that you've made some kind of fundamental misjudgment of the situation that you're operating in, that's a deeper problem, and something that would maybe point you towards needing to pivot completely or to like start a new business. You know, I would say if changing your principles isn't as big a deal as a complete pivot or starting again, then your principles might not quite be deep enough. And the idea with DXW, the thing I would say about DXW there is that public sector focus is absolutely rooted in our culture and our practice. And I think if I sort of woke up one morning feeling pretty strange and said, okay, well, I'm a bit bored of the public sector now, you know, I think we're going to go and help supermarkets to sell more groceries, I think a lot of the team would leave. Yeah. And if I did the same thing but said, we're going to go and work for gambling companies or something, I think they'd all go. Yeah. And as well they should, because it would be a fundamental breach of one of those core principles of the business. Yeah. So I would say, long-winded answer, but I would say if you're looking to specialize right down into a small area, think about what your principles are. Why are you trying to do that? Why is it important? Why is it good for you, for the business, for the team, for the clients? And try and come up with something that articulates that really clearly, that you can hold really tightly to and use to guide you when you're thinking about, well, did this idea work? Where should we go from here?
Yeah, love it. Please don't work for any supermarkets or gambling companies, because I really love what you guys do. So thank you very much for your time, and yeah, all the best, and you know, continued success in creating, you know, really meaningful experiences for human beings and changing lives. Really love it. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening. Now I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like me to interview a particular specialist agency, send them my way. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Dan the Agency Man, or send me an email to daniel@theagencycollective.co.uk. Also, please subscribe to the podcast to get notified when we release a new episode. I'm Dan the Agency Man, and you've been listening to Say No.